everybody feeling, really? All right. So welcome to the National Museum of Women in the Arts. My name is Milani Douglas. I'm the new Director of Public Programs here. I see some repeat visitors that are also, and I see some new people as well. Thank you for joining us as we enter our third season of Women Arts and Social Change. I cannot think of a better way to get our season started than to amplify the voices of women in the arts with a fresh talk for change with Judy Chicago in conversation with Ali Gass, right? So let's give them a hand. We thank all of our members who are here and who are watching online. We hope to meet and make new members. Your support is invaluable. In addition, I would like to thank our generous sponsors and visionary donors whose leadership gifts help to launch and continue to sustain this initiative. Denise Littlefield Sobel, the M.L. Dorey Arts Initiative, the Riva and David Logan Foundation, the Swartz Foundation, and Bernstein Family Foundation. We have a fabulous team that has put together a wonderful evening for you to enjoy. Even though I stand here by myself, I am not alone. I'm never alone at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. I'd like to thank my public programs manager, Alicia Gregory, and stage manager, Beth Ferrero, for being a top-notch team. I am thrilled about the work we do together. And I have just a few reminders. Some of you know, right? First one, cell phones off. Right? So let's check them real quick. Turn your cell phones off. Make sure your ringers are not going to come up and be a part of the recording. It's archival footage. Also, no recordings. If you take a quick picture with no flash that you're going to upload online, we'd love to see that. Hashtag us, but no recordings beyond that. And also, no flash, right? So thank you so much. Now allow me to introduce the woman who steers our ship, our museum director, Susan Fisher-Sterling. Thank you.
Everyone have their brochure? Okay, well, you'll get some on the way out. I just wanted to mention that the event this evening with Judy Chicago as our keynote speaker is the kickoff of our series this year. And there are many other great things to come, so please make sure that you get a copy of this, take a look at it online, and come back often. All right, I brought my handkerchief in case I start to cry. So this Fresh Talk and Sunday Supper is really the opening event for Inside the Dinner Party, which I hope a number of you have had a chance to see on the fourth floor. How many of you were able to see the exhibition? Oh, great, more than 3/4. That's great. We'll see what we can do during Sunday supper to allow the rest of you to take a look at it. But I hope you were able to see it because this installation, which has been supported by the Mary Ross Taylor Exhibition Fund at NMWA, is a milestone event. It was created by our library director, Sarah Osborne Bender. I hope a lot of you get to meet Sarah later tonight in consultation with Judy. And it documents the establishment of the Judy Chicago Visual Archive at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. And for that I say, woo! And it is made possible thanks to the artists' unstinting generosity toward the museum. I want to thank Judy. I want to thank Donald Woodman through the Flower, supporters like Judy Kovler who are here with us, and I also want to thank Judy's staff for all their help. The creation of the Judy Chicago Visual Archive at NMWA also rounds out the rich documentation that exists on Chicago's life and work, including the Judy Chicago papers at the Schlesinger Library at Harvard, and the Judy Chicago Art Education Collection at Pennsylvania State University. The Women's Museum is currently collaborating with these two academic institutions to create the Judy Chicago online portal, another first for us that we plan to replicate in future with other artists' archives. I'm pleased to welcome Karen Esland from Penn State University, who is the driving partner in this project along with Sarah Osborne Bender. Going back to the Chicago Visual Archive here, When it is packed up and completely housed at the Women's Museum, it will document Chicago's artistic career through a collection of slides, negatives, contact sheets, prints, and other ephemera that span her early years as a minimalist in the 1960s through to the present. Along with the Chicago Portal Project, the archives will strengthen public access, online and on-site, to NIMWA's unique library and archive collections. This is a cornerstone project for us, and in the long term, it will help us to reinvent our Betty Boyd Dietrich Library and Research Center for 21st century audiences. And as we triple down on Judy Chicago, it gives me great pleasure to announce that in 2019, NIMWA will publish the first major monograph on Chicago's arts since 2000. And in that year as well, we will host a major exhibition entitled The End, A Meditation on Death and Destruction, in celebration of the artist's upcoming milestone birthday. She's going to be 32. Thanks again are due to the artist, as well as Jeannie Greenberg Royatin of Salon 94 and the Jessica Silverman Gallery in San Francisco for working with us on both of these critically important projects. Finally, or perhaps as a prelude to this evening's talk, I would like to recognize Judy Chicago's long relationship with our founder, Wilhelmina Cole Holliday. It is Judy who first stood up in defense of the value of the Women's Museum 30 years ago. And it was Mrs. Holliday who stood up for Judy during the controversy over the permanent housing potential for the dinner party at the UDC in 1990. How great would it be if we had that piece here now, 2 blocks from the White House? That said, we are proud of our continuing friendship with the artist, our new Chicago Visual Archive, and our shared values, where we champion women in the arts and through the arts each and every day. Thank you, ladies, and now it's my pleasure to have our speakers come up. Is that the next piece, Milani? Judy and Allie.
Before we start, I just want to introduce you to 3 people who play or have played a very major role in my life. My husband and longtime partner, photographer Donald Woodman, who I think is in the back, with whom I've collaborated many times. The woman who our assistant says is the only person I listen to, which is not exactly true. I listen to her and I listen to Donald too. But anyway, but still, that's Diane Gellin. You saw her picture if you saw the show. And when she arrived the other day, we were in the show, and I was talking to, I think, Sarah Bender, and I said, Diane's arriving, you're going to recognize her. She looks just like that. Where is Diane? Diane Gellin changed my life. She was one of the first people to come to work with me on the dinner party. She became the dinner party administrator. She organized the international tour of the dinner party. And I keep telling this story about she was one member of the core staff who refused to take a salary. She used to say, if you don't hire me, you can't fire me, and I'm not going anywhere. And the other person I'd like to introduce is our wonderful new assistant, Megan Schultz. Where are you, Megan? She has come to us recently, but she is in the tradition of people like Diane.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, I am so honored to be here. I want to thank everyone at NEMWA, and I really just want to thank Judy. And before we actually start, and I promise I will do less speaking and let Judy talk about her work.
I don't want that.
Okay, I'll do a lot of speaking. I will tell a lot of speaking. I'm capable of that. I wanted to say a couple of things about why it feels so incredibly special to me to be here with you now. And you know a little bit about this. I came to art history in college through the lens of women's studies. It was still women's studies, not gender studies then, and I was a women's studies major and started taking art history classes at Columbia and discovered the work of Judy Chicago. And it felt like a revelation. It felt like this moment that I understood the power of artistic practice to change the world and shift perspectives. I went on to graduate school to study with a great feminist art historian, Linda Nochlin, and while I was in graduate school, my very first museum job ever was to work on opening the Sackler Center and the dinner party at the Brooklyn Museum of Art. And it was like this dream come true. You don't remember this, but I was at a dinner with you. I was a little graduate student writing entries about the dinner party, and I was totally in awe. I've gone on and had a career that was really dedicated to contemporary art curatorial practice, where if you look at the record of artists that I have worked with, I really show women artists. I've been deeply committed to it my whole career. I've moved on. I'm now the director of the Smart Museum at the University of Chicago, where I transitioned to because there was a real commitment there to diversify the collection. And I think about you and the power of your art practice all the time. And here we are today having this conversation, and it feels in so many ways that my career has kind of come this almost full circle, to have started at the Brooklyn Museum as a little intern writing about you, and then to be sitting here on stage talking to you about your career. And I will be writing a major essay for this book that's coming out. So I'm so honored. I want to also just quickly say that probably the reason I came to feminist art practice was because my mother always used to bring me here whenever we visited DC when I was a little girl. So it's a very special place. Okay, now we're going to talk to Judy. It's not really all about me. Okay. Judy you put together this really wonderful PowerPoint that we're going to go through.
Well, actually, Donald put it together.
Megan may have put it together. Everybody put it together. And it looks at 5 decades of your practice. And I want to really go through it and talk about the work. Talk about the work we know well, maybe the work we don't know as well. And I really want to think about this arc of your career, and threaded through the conversation, think about what does it mean to make work that is politically engaged, thinking about bigger issues of the world, looking at a kind of slippage between art and life, because of course you're deeply connected to materials, you're deeply connected to formal artistic practice, but there's always this kind of driving force to think about and inquire about and question the big issues that confront us as we move through life. So let's just start.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your early work and talk a little bit about what was the early reception of your work? What was the kind of community in which you made it in the 60s? And how much did, in fact, an artistic community kind of help that practice for you? And I think we're looking up at the 1960s. Tell me what we're looking at.
We're looking at a car hood. We're looking at Rainbow Picket, Pasadena Lifesavers, and Skyflesh from the Flesh Gardens. And it actually, that actually traverses over 10 years.
Over 10 years.
The work I was doing in graduate school looks a lot like that image, the car hood, called Flight Hood. And I went to UCLA, and my painting teachers hated that work.
Why?
Wombs and breasts. Moreover, they hated my color too, because it was a time, the 60s, UCLA art department was dominated by a palette of kind of earth colors.
Yeah.
After Rico Lebrun and Nathan Oliveris, who were kind of the reigning deities of the time. And of course, my color always tended towards ivory, pink, gold, aqua. So the scene that I emerged from graduate school into was the Southern California scene, which was incredibly inhospitable to women.
To women, of course. We think of all these male artists we know well.
Yes, and the reigning school was, of course, the Ferris Gallery and the Ferris Boys. And my first decade of practice, you know, from the time I was a child, I wanted to be an artist, and I started studying when I was 5 at the Art Institute, and I wanted to make a contribution to art history, and I was a very ambitious young girl, ambitious young artist, and my ambitions met a wall of resistance, so that, for example, Rainbow Picket, the sculpture, because I moved away from the kind of biomorphic, overtly female forms that I was making in order to be able to be accepted in the art scene.
So you moved to this like architectonic
and
form.
more minimal, but even that wasn't sufficient. The most important curator in Southern California at the time was Walter Hopps. And he used to visit our studios. I had a studio in Pasadena every month. There were a lot of artists in Pasadena. And when he saw Rainbow Picket, he literally refused to look at it. And years later, I saw him, and he said to me, Judy, I know you hated me, because I wrote about this incident, although I didn't mention him by name in my first book, Through the Flower. And he said, you have to understand, in the 60s, women were either artists' wives or groupies. So what was I to make of the fact that you were creating stronger art than the men? I had to avert my eyes. And he actually expected me to say, oh, Walter, that's just fine. I totally understand. The only thing I can say about it is many years later, during Pacific Standard Time, the Getty-funded initiative in Southern California, looking at the 60s to the 80s, I ran into Walter after a panel. He was with his third wife, who said to me, I love your work.
Amazing.
But anyway, so I moved away from my natural content, but the fact is that by the end of the 60s, I was sick and tired of that, and I decided that I was not going to do that anymore. I was going to find my way back to my own content as a woman, but I had sort of disconnected from it. However, I had built, these are 4 car hoods, and the thing that I'm really happy about is that, as I said, these images, birth hood, flight hood, bigamy hood, car hood, those 3 come from paintings from graduate school that I destroyed because of the rejection from my professors. But when Pacific Standard Time happened, I went to auto body school to learn to spray paint. I did that car hood in
And this is a very
auto
LA
body school.
car culture.
I didn't know anything about cars.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Donald, I didn't even know what kind of car hood it was, you know?
was gonna
He's like,
ask you
oh,
that.
that's like whatever. And I mean, I just like the shape.
Yeah.
But anyway, when Pacific Standard Time, we had moved all my early work to New Mexico sometime after I started living there, because I always thought I'd go back to LA. But because of Pacific Standard Time, we went through all my early work, and I discovered that I had laid out these 3 images, but I'd never finished them. So I finished them, and I was really glad, because I thought to myself, you know, there's anything wrong with that imagery.
No, it's fantastic. It's really
That
fun.
one belongs to the Musée du Moderne in Stockholm.
Where it
The
belongs. I mean, these are serious works of art. And I think the story that you told is even more powerful in the sense that I think there are a lot of women who got dissuaded from continuing with their passion and dreams of being artists, given the culture.
Absolutely.
But you just kept going and found your way back to something that was very true.
Well, the thing is that I came up with a lot of other young women in art school and graduate school, and somewhere along the line, you know, they kind
Everybody
of
drops
disappeared.
away.
But that was one of the reasons I started the feminist art program in the early 70s, and I didn't tell the head of the art department what I really was going to do. I mean,
What did you say?
I said, well, you know, I've been working as a professional artist for 10 years, and, you know, I came up with a lot of young women, and something happened, and so I thought it would really be good if I worked with some young women and helped them become professional artists. I didn't say,
I'm going to start a feminist art.
right, I'm going to start the first feminist art program, and I'm going to start a feminist art practice.
Right,
He
and
would
it's a
have looked at me.
resistance to this patriarchal system you have.
Right, and you're going to pay me to do
Right.
it.
Well done. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So so let's talk then a little bit about how you moved through and then perhaps into the dinner party, which is of course I think arguably what people know first and foremost about
Okay.
you.
Well, by the end of the 60s, not only was I making this kind of radical change in my art making and going off to start the first feminist art program, but I was also looking back in history because my father was a student of history, and so I grew up with the idea that history is important. And I was having so much trouble in terms of the LA art scene. I mean, you know, they'd say things like, you can't be a woman and an artist too. Or I was telling a young woman who was interviewing me, the biggest compliment you could get in the 60s was you paint like a man.
You paint like a
Right.
man. I've heard other women tell me that too.
Yeah, so anyway, so I'm like, I can't be the first woman to have ever encountered these kinds of obstacles.
No.
So I started looking back in history and discovered that there was this unbelievably rich, untold heritage of women. So by then I was doing paintings on canvas, and I started trying to use the formal language I had built in my first decade of practice to make abstract portraits of these different women I was discovering.
Okay.
Okay.
Talk to me about the materials of this.
This is sprayed, these are sprayed acrylic,
Sprayed acrylic
on canvas. They're 40 inches by 40 inches. I mean, what I learned at auto body schools has stood me in good stead throughout my career. Although in order to go to auto body school, I was the only woman.
I can
out of
only imagine you at auto
250
body
men.
school. It's
Right.
unbelievable.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it was unbelievable.
I hope we have some archival pictures of that. Okay.
Okay, so
So you create this, you're very committed to kind of rewriting the canon of history and putting women's untold stories back in.
Well, I wasn't quite there yet.
Okay.
I was at this point just trying to honor the women I was discovering.
I see.
Okay, now, then I didn't want to continue to spray paint
Okay.
because I wanted more detail. Like these are all Prismacolor. I wanted to get more detail in the painting.
Uh-huh.
And that's when I discovered China painting and started out my apprenticeship to the China painters to learn. It took 2 years for me to learn how to China
So you're
paint.
continually training yourself in new ways with the materials. with
Yeah, in fact,
practice.
one of the things that Chad Alligood pointed out in his essay for the monograph on my early work is that throughout my career, my practice has been to like learn the techniques I needed in order to do the
Get the
piece,
effect
the
you
art I
wanted.
wanted. Yes,
Yeah.
and that it wasn't.
Let's go back for a second and
Yeah.
just touch on the iconography.
Right, okay.
Because this is what we know. Let's talk about how you came to this iconography and how you talk about
Well, you know, I said I had distanced myself from that early iconography,
Yep.
and I was trying to find my way back.
it. Yeah.
To
the
it.
organic, to the bodily, to the
Yes, and it was painful because I had faced so much rejection in the first decade of my career. I mean, it's so I did this series of drawings called the Rejection Quintet. Like now, meanwhile, I'm studying women's history, and I'm learning how to China paint.
Wow.
And then I started trying to work on my imagery to make it clearer what I was after.
Yep.
I've told this story before, but in the early 70s, I was lecturing a lot about my work, and I had this really sort of major breakthrough experience in North Dakota. I was lecturing about my work at a university.
Yeah.
There were about 200 people in the audience, and I had just finished The Great Ladies. That's what made me think of it. And I was showing The Great Ladies and talking about what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
And I asked the audience, well, you know, what do you think? Because, I mean, you have to realize this women's history,
Right.
women's iconography, the idea of a female aesthetic. I mean,
Yeah.
these were not ideas.
No, this
And the
is-
word feminist art, I mean,
Right.
none of that existed.
Right. This is why I wanted
right?
to get us back to this moment.
Yeah,
'cause
yeah,
I-
okay. So somebody stood up and said, well, I think what you're trying to do is really interesting, but if you hadn't explained it, I wouldn't have been able to understand it from the
Interesting.
work.
From these.
Yes.
Yes.
And then, now we go to the rejection
Now we go
quintet.
there.
Right.
I
That's a
get
really
it.
good question, Ellie,
Yeah.
because then, so now I'm taking my formal language.
Yes.
And I'm trying to open it
understand this
up,
completely
peel it
now.
out, and
Yes.
then actually in the last image,
Yes.
I started down a path that I hope will become really clear when the end opens here, and I'll tell you why, because somebody from the University of Chicago, a very, very famous philosopher
Yes.
named Martha Nussbaum,
Yep.
is writing on the project that's going to be shown here.
Wow.
And it's a meditation on death and extinction, and she talked about, in her draft, she talked about the death images, which are all female figures.
Wow.
And she talked about how they are grappling with a universal experience, which is death. When I did that drawing, what I was starting down a path of was to see if I could figure out how to make the female experience stand for the universal
Yes.
in the way male art and literature have always done. And if the the project I just finished is successful in terms of what I communicate to people, I will have come to the point I
Yes.
started
That's incredible. That's
right there, because I took a vaginal form and I made it a cave, I made it
Yeah.
a flower, I made it a chestnut, I made it a butterfly.
Yeah.
I was also trying to make it an active form.
Yes, I see it. It's incredible. And I will say that the greatest artists in history do this. As you change your materials and you change your subject matter, there is this incredible through line of intention. And it's quite an extraordinary thing to think about this project we're going to see and the way it relates back to this in terms of a grand vision of really getting to an essential iconography, universal sense of being. This makes sense to me in a new way. Thank you. That's great. All right. dinner
Okay,
party.
so there I am. I made this big painting through the flower. There's a companion painting to this one that belongs to Diane Gellin that she's put on loan here. And of course, those are images about trying to move through the flower of femininity into a bigger space, a human space, because of course the construct of femininity has been constricting to women as well, right? So, okay, so now I'm broken through in terms of my imagery. I've learned China painting. I'm
Wow.
starting to apply China paint to my imagery, and I'm starting down. I mean, I think of myself, this is before I even met Diane Gellin. Here I am in my studio. I've learned all about this history of women that nobody knows anything, and that people don't know about. And I'm like, me and my paintbrush are going to change.
We are going to change the way people think of history.
Right.
Yeah.
I am going to
Yeah.
teach the history of women in Western civilization through art.
Right.
Okay?
And
that's.
now, thank goodness, many students learn about a lot of these women in school. But probably-
Yes,
they
but
do.
then.
Then no. I know.
Yeah, I
get
mean,
it.
and that's what I meant about Diane coming to work with me. And she was a young art history student, and graduate student, and she knew the history of male achievement. She knew that the reason men had achieved at the level they have is because they had a level of support that has simply been unavailable to women. And Diane's like, I'm going to provide that for you.
For you. Unbelievable. So talk about the community of people. So I think what's amazing about the show, upstairs or downstairs, wherever we are, is this understanding of how many people just flocked to the idea of this project, and that you really just did almost a call for participation, and people would just come.
Even without a call
Even
for
without a call for
participation.
participation, people just knew, and you fed a need for all these, largely women, I think.
Yeah, but the core group, I mean, there was a core group of maybe 20 or 25 people, and certainly in the primary group, there were a number of men. There were definitely a number of men. Oh, I forgot to introduce Johanna Dimitrakis, whose film is showing in the show inside
really
the dinner
good, the
party
film.
studio. Yes, I forgot, Joe. I'm really sorry. She came in from LA, and without her film, you really wouldn't have the insights into the dinner party studio.
I know.
Right?
And I was commenting that with all my work on the dinner party, I had never seen those images of its creation and the community of creating it that you created.
So I started down this path of, I started by myself. For the first year and a half, I worked by myself, and then I decided I wanted the plates to rise up, and then I started working with Leonard Scuro, who's the guy who designed the ceramic technology. He's in the panels. And then a woman named Susan Hill wrote to me and asked if I ever took assistance. And I asked her, I was trying to teach myself embroidery on an embroidery machine.
See, I got another example of you turning to a new material.
Yeah, and actually that became a big joke in the dinner party studio, which I'll tell you in a minute. Anyway, so I said to Susan, do you know anything about needlework? She said, well, I don't, but everybody in my family sewed. I said, fine, you're in charge of needlework, right? And then Diane. And that was for the first year, it was basically the four of us. But then once I started designing runners, needlework takes a really long time and is very labor intensive. So, but people would just show up at the door. I mean, you have to understand the 70s. The 70s, you know, people always ask me, do I have any regrets? And I'm like, yeah, I regret it's not the 70s. You know, we had hope. We thought we were going to change the world, right? You know, so you have to understand the environment, you know. And so the idea that...
I mean, this is art deeply bound to its context, but at the same time, incredibly transcendent, still represented.
Okay, so it took 5 years, and about 3.5 years into it, we used to have these Thursday night dinners that Johanna used to document in the film. And there was this joke I think they used to tell it every week. It's like, I'm like tired of this joke already. Okay. Oh yes, Judy used to think she would try to paint in the morning, needlework in the afternoon, and do research at night. And then they'd all go, ha, 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 look how many of them.
Well, you and I have talked about women's intention to take on a lot more than they can handle, so I get the joke.
Yes,
Okay,
right.
yes, exactly. I'm like, you can do that.
Yeah, you can do that, right. Tell the history of women in Western civilization, right, all by myself. Yeah, okay, fine. Anyway, so fortunately, a lot of people came forward to help me finish the dinner party.
Amazing. It's incredible. And what did it mean for it to finally find its home at the Sackler Center? How did you feel when that came to be in, I guess, 2005?
The Sackler Center opened in 2007. It's just going to celebrate its 10th year.
Okay.
But actually, it was acquired and donated to the museum in 2002.
Okay.
And thereby concluding a very long, convoluted struggle. Because I said to Diane yesterday when we were in the show, somebody was asking about this, and I said, Diane, if we hadn't gotten the dinner party permanently housed, would we be done? And she said, no.
Nope.
We would not have achieved our goal.
Yeah.
That was from the beginning, because after all, the dinner party tells a story that we're watching happen. Okay? There have been periods before when women artists really came to the fore, and then they were eclipsed. There have been periods before, like in Weimar, where transgender people became visible, and then it was pushed back. We are in
another moment of crisis.
Another moment of pushing back and erasure. And I knew that unless the dinner party was permanently housed, it would simply be another chapter in the ongoing erasure of women's achievements.
You're right. You're 100% right. Yep.
And the fact that it's not just its permanent housing, it's the fact that 20% of the traffic to the Brooklyn Museum goes to see the dinner party, which prevents... The important thing about that is it prevents the art world from being able to say, oh, feminist art is passé.
Feminist art
It's
is
a
this moment in the
relic. It's a moment in the
70s.
70s.
Yes.
Yeah, right. That's why all these people from all over the world are trekking
I know.
across the world
I know.
to see it.
And that's why I have all the various things I do in my life. When I tell people I'm writing on Judy Chicago, I was, oh my God. So, I mean, it still exists. Everybody thinks about it, and it's very important. So,
Okay, let's move along.
Well, moving, I
Okay.
know, we're going to run out of time. All right, so what I wanted to say very quickly is that you have made so much work since that time, continue to make so much work. Let's go through it. What are we looking at here?
We're looking at a 32-foot drawing. This is my studio in a small town in Northern California called Benicia, where with Mary Ross Taylor, who I did the Birth Project,
Yes,
which I
fabulous
spent
project.
5 years on. It's 85 works celebrating birth and creation. I did it at a time when I thought there were no images of birth in Western art. Frida Kahlo's work was not known
Yeah.
then. Only with a show that Massimiliano Gianni from the New
Oh, of
Museum
course.
did in Milan called The Great Mother
Yes.
has it become apparent that another form of erasure is the erasure of work whose content does not fit into the male-centered narrative.
Yep.
That is work about what women do,
Yes.
which is, for example, give
Give
birth.
birth. And
So-
most of what we see is post-giving birth, cradling of infants with
But anyway, so that's a small birth project work called Birth Tear Tear. It's an embroidery by a wonderful needleworker named Jane
It's
Thompson.
an embroidery, oh.
Yeah, it's embroidery on silk, the one on the left. The one on the right is a 14-foot sprayed and quilted work called Earth Birth.
Stunning.
And it, again, spray painting was very important because I sprayed fabric paint, acrylic. I sprayed again in Power Play for the underpainting of these huge works. This is a work called In the Shadow of the Handgun, and that's a small weaving called Power Headache. Oh, God, you see all those guys, it's like, oh, I have such a headache. Yeah, right, just like share power. Instead of taking Tylenol. It'll be much more effective. Anyway,
This is a...
so in the 80s, when I was finishing the Birth Project, it was very much my practice, actually. Before I finished one project, I've sort
That
of
was
known
one of my
what I
questions,
wanted
was how
to
do you
work
sort
on.
of conceive of and begin to transition to a new body of
That's a
work?
good question, actually, Elsie. When I was working on the dinner party, I did, on the back of the Mary Wollstonecraft runner, I did a scene of Mary Wollstonecraft dying in childbirth after 2 months after having given birth. Actually, she died of childbed fever. But 2 months after giving birth to her daughter Mary, who became Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. And when I did the drawing, it was incredibly raw and graphic. And then I saw it transformed into needlework. And I thought, gee, that's another subject that seems outside the art discourse.
Yeah.
I'd like to take up the subject of birth.
My goodness.
But the thing is that when the dinner party, after the dinner party's first successful showing in San Francisco, the exhibition tour collapsed.
Yeah.
I lost everything, my studio, my staff, I was in debt, and I had to start all over again, and I wouldn't have been able to, except I got, as the dinner party traveled, I got literally hundreds of letters, particularly from needleworkers, saying, if you ever want to do another project, I want to volunteer.
Wow.
And so I did want to do another project, and I wanted to do it in needlework.
Wow.
So I started down that path, and then before I finished the Birth Project, which was going really slowly because needlework takes, and also that's actually when I began to learn about, I have not lived a typical woman's life. I don't have children. I don't have family obligations. My mother was very independent. She set up her own retirement situation. I didn't
Right.
become a sandwich.
Yeah. Sandwich. Yeah.
But for the needleworkers I worked with, and I traveled to their houses. I worked with 150 needleworkers, and I travel to their houses and meet with them to review the work. I saw women's lives. And
Daily
now
life.
a lot of my needleworkers could barely manage to extract 10 hours of focus work a week.
Of course.
I mean, me, I work 10 hours a day, right?
Yeah.
So it was a huge lesson to me about the ways in which the demands on women's and their lives and the expectations.
The expectations.
But anyway, it also made the work go slow.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
so
it's family obligations will do that.
I
Okay.
went to Europe. I went to Italy, and of course, I'm a student of art history. But I actually saw the great Renaissance paintings for the
Yeah.
first time, and I thought to myself, if modern society was born in the Renaissance, so was our concept of the heroic,
The heroic,
the
absolutely.
male heroic. And so I thought, I think I want to inquire. I want to start an inquiry. And this was before gender studies, queer theory. So I went to the library, this is my want, looked up gender. All that came up was women, as if only women have gender.
Yes, because otherwise it's just, people,
Right.
men, and yeah. Yeah.
So I did this big project
This is
called
amazing.
Power Play.
And let's talk about it in the context of life
okay,
today.
so like
Yeah.
that's called Rainbow Man. It's 22 feet long by 9 feet high. This is 9 feet by 14 feet, called Driving the World to Destruction. I was finishing this when I met Donald, my husband, in Santa Fe. I was saying to you, this is 9 feet by 6 feet, pissing on nature. Oh, isn't that what Donald Trump's doing, like right now? So I hate it that my work is so prescient on one
I
level.
know.
Really, no.
I get it. You
You
want
know?
the world to not.
I want the world to be different.
Exactly, I know.
But anyway, I'm very, very glad that
This
Salon
is
94 is going to show Power Play in January in New York.
Well, we're going to have to talk about it because I'm going to do a big show called Real American Hero, which is, I'll tell you about it. Anyway, this is perfect for it.
Good.
But yeah, this is an amazing piece. And we also spoke a little bit about what political art, and we can get into that a little bit later perhaps. To me, and you said this earlier also, art that's overtly political and didactic just lives in that moment. It's like a protest poster or it's whatever it is, but it has no lifespan. This is work that is deeply about injustices in the world and a need for change. But
On a
it's
global
On a
level.
global level, you're right, on a global level. It's not temporally specific, it's
Right.
not politically specific, but look, it feels so of this exact moment because the world hasn't changed
Enough.
It has changed, but not enough. That's a perfect way to
It's
put it.
changed some. You couldn't have been the director of the Smart Museum
absolutely
when
right. That's absolutely
when I
right.
was your age.
You're absolutely right,
That
with 2
wouldn't have
kids
happened.
and a husband who does a lot of that work. Yep,
Right. Yeah.
absolutely.
So it's
Yep.
just not changed enough
Yeah.
or in enough places for enough people on the planet.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
Okay.
Next one.
So
we'll keep
then,
going.
so Donald and I met right as I was finishing the Power Play, and both of us come from secular Jewish families. We were
Right.
both raised before Holocaust studies were mandated in school, so neither of us knew anything much about the Holocaust. And Shoah, the 9-hour Claude Lanzmann film, was
Yeah.
showing in New York
Oh, wow.
in fall of 1985. And I said to Donald, I want to go see that film. Do you want to come with me? Now you have to understand, I had met the kind of man I didn't think I would ever meet.
Yeah.
Anti-war, radical, came up through the Boston women's movement, lived in a teepee rather than succumb to the demands of the construct of masculinity, and also he had this already career where he had been an assistant to a really famous photographer. He had worked with Minor White, another famous photographer. He had been Agnes Martin's assistant for a long time.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, sure, great, let's go.
Oh, my goodness.
Right, so
Yeah.
we got on a plane, and it was the first time in my life that I ever felt bonded to somebody, not by gender,
That's incredible.
but by culture. and by
partnership.
values.
Yeah.
Because we were both brought up with Jewish values, even though we came from, so we, just like I set off with my paintbrush to tell the
Yeah,
story
yeah.
of women's history,
You
you
decided
could
to
have
do
gone, you could have gone to any major contemporary museum at that time in 1985, and you wouldn't even know the Holocaust existed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? It happened.
Yep.
So we
And
set
you
out.
mentioned to me that in some ways, I had asked you the question, what was an instance of a body of work that was a real challenge to
This
bring to
was a
fruition?
real
And you
challenge.
said this was a real challenge.
It took us 8 years.
Wow.
I mean, there were times, I mean, okay, we started out with the idea, we went around the country, we saw how the Holocaust was presented in various Jewish institutions, all with a focus on the Jewish experience.
Right.
That's how we started, and because we didn't know anything else. Then we took this 2.5-month trip through the landscape of the Holocaust: Germany, France, Austria, Czech Republic, Latvia, Lithuania, Austria, oh God, Russia. And in every country, the Holocaust was presented differently.
Yeah.
And we realized that it was way vaster in scale and had impacted way more people than we had any idea. We saw protests by homosexuals at Dachau who wanted a memorial to their suffering. Anyway, it was really, really dark
Yeah.
and challenging material because it brought us face to face with the global structure of injustice and oppression, out of which the Holocaust grew
Yep.
and continued genocides grow. It's like, you know, there's this often repeated cant in the Jewish community, never forget. Like, never forget what? How to do it?
Right.
Because all that's happened is people are doing
Doing
it
it in different places. for
different places, different ways.
different people.
More efficiently sometimes.
Yeah.
But anyway,
And I think the reason artists talk, or I've heard other artists say, it is one of the hardest things to deal with because the horror is so grand. How do you even begin to represent? What does it mean to represent? Although it's incredibly important to find some universal language again.
absolutely,
represent.
that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And so what we did with most of the Holocaust Project combines painting and photography.
Yep.
The painting, this happens to be a tapestry, and that's a stained glass window, but most of the work fuses painting and photography. The photography roots the images in the reality
there's
of the
almost a
historic
documentary element,
event,
yeah.
and then the painting paints in the human story, because, you know, it's really hard to identify with a pile of bones.
Right.
You know, with what's left over.
But the figure.
And to remember that this is what people did to people, okay?
Yep.
So the other thing that happened to me personally, you know, people think, because they think feminist art is about women,
Yeah.
that's all it is.
Right.
And for me, my career is about my feminist gaze widening. And the Holocaust Project was a major step in that because I began to understand women's oppression in this much larger global system of injustice and oppression.
That's an incredible thing to say, to talk about the feminist approach being something that just gives you a lens through which to look at the world and
world.
injustice in general.
And
That's
actually, you know, I know that one of the things you were thinking of talking to me about was about younger women artists.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, actually, I have to tell you that, you know, I'm supportive of everybody's efforts to express themselves.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'm tired of art about, like,
Of course.
it's
But I
like,
think to think of the
open
idea
your
that,
eyes, open
right, that
your,
feminist art practice is about looking at the world.
at the world
Yep.
and bringing a feminist lens
Yeah.
and feminist understanding to the world and making a contribution.
Making a contribution towards progress and change against injustice, against oppression, against writing people out of history or literally eradicating them. Yes.
Absolutely right.
Okay.
Absolutely right.
That's powerful. All right.
Okay, so then, you know, because we were working on a subject that was close to the heart of the Jewish community, we spent a lot of time going to various Jewish organizations, and we saw a lot of Judaica, and one of the things that is really been wonderful about at least Reform, Reconstruction, and Conservative Judaism is that there has been a reconstruction
Yep.
of liturgy
Yep.
to make it more egalitarian, but the Judaica artifacts
is
have
not
not
it.
caught up
I agree
with
with
the
you. Yes.
reconstruction. So I've done a little Judaica
You're
myself.
right. Yes.
This is Miriam and Elijah Cup. This is the female side of Pesach, Passover,
Yeah.
3 women. That's, of course, Miriam, Moses' sister. This is a Seder plate. And then the prints are from a suite of prints called Voices from the Song of Songs. And it's based on a translation, a retranslation of the Song of Songs by a biblical scholar named Marcia Falk. And when she went back, she discovered there were male and female voices in the Song of Songs. And I've always been interested, there's almost no erotica from a woman's point of view
Right.
historically. So I've been really interested in fashioning images of mutuality, of desire.
Wow, that's just incredible. As an aside, I grew up with my mother leading our Seder with the feminist Haggadah. I can't believe I haven't seen these before.
Really?
You showed them to me. Yeah, okay. This is amazing. All right, I'm gonna do a time check, see how we're doing.
We have just a little short,
Okay.
so then the millennium was coming, and, on the corner of the dinner party tables, there's the millennium triangles,
yeah.
the millennium, that was this millennium was when everything was
Yeah.
supposed to change, and
Yeah,
it didn't.
and it didn't.
So let's hope for
For the
another
next one.
millennium. So
Okay.
this is called Resolutions for, Resolutions of Stitch in Time. And what it is images, again, combining painting and needlework, although this is a large-scale sculpture. And they reinterpret kind of conventional adages for what it would really mean to have a truly diverse world. So it ends with this sort of not clearly gendered, clearly ethnicity. I mean, it's kind
welcoming.
And around the base, with Japanese gold embroidery and carving, it says, "Find it in your heart."
My goodness.
In 22 different languages.
And we talked about this a little bit, but again, your prescience is astounding as you think about the world we live in at this moment, which is closing the door on difference and people and not inviting people to be part of our lives, perhaps, and not allowing
Or our
people
world.
or our world. Exactly. So again, you have this incredible artistic practice that resonates against the injustice that we are seeing all over the world, but very close to home, very close to home.
Too
right here.
close to home.
Too close to home right now. Let's talk a little bit, one of the things I do think in some ways it's interesting to think about the path you laid out for younger women artists, but I think that's a topic for another time. I want to talk though about your legacy, because I think this is this extraordinary body of work. So let's begin to talk about where you've been most recently and what are the things that are being done to really deeply secure this legacy in a significant way and begin to make the conversation we're having now and the conversation you've been having with others around this country about all of this work together, this idea of a feminist lens that has a much broader angle than I think we think of it. What's being done? What's happening?
Well, let's just flip through the rest of this. The last 10 years, because again, it connects to what's going to happen at Nemwa. The last 10 years I've been working in glass. Now you have to
A new material.
And then that will just go, and then I started, can I have the next one? Then I started bringing in materials that I had used before, bronze and porcelain. And this is called Heads Up. And it's looking, why do I love glass? Because it allows you to look through the surface and see what's under the facade.
Oh my goodness. Okay, how did you teach yourself glass?
I went to Pilchuck. I didn't teach myself glass. Glass is
Oh, then
real.
these,
And
the
then
fireworks. Oh my
the
goodness.
reason I even wanted to show that was because, for a long time, the first 10 years of my work were not known.
Yes.
And now the last 10 years of my work
are
is
not
not known. So I figure sooner or later but the one
I have a feeling they're all going to be known.
One thing that has happened is that my fireworks pieces that I started in the 60s and had to stop, I had the opportunity, because of Pacific Standard Time, to start again. And that's been just thrilling for me.
Amazing.
Anyway,
Will you
so,
explain quickly the fireworks for people who don't know?
okay, so go back one. I started out going out, just out to beaches with my friends and then with my students to the desert, and trying to soften the environment, feminize the environment. And gradually I got more complicated, and then most recently I got even more complicated. I had this opportunity to do this huge piece in relationship to the Brooklyn Museum show for my 75th birthday about my early work. I did this huge piece called A Butterfly for Brooklyn. I mean, this was unbelievable. 12,000 people watched it, and then at the end of it, they all sang me happy birthday.
Oh, Judy, oh my goodness.
I was like weeping.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so I have this huge legacy of work.
Yeah.
So I can't guarantee everybody's legacy. It's beyond my powers, even though I thought I could do so much when I was young. One of the things that happens when you get older is you get, what is my Weaver used to say, get mugged by reality. So now I've been really focused on trying to make sure my work is not erased. And Susan talked about this collaboration between three institutions, Nemours, Penn State, and the Schlesinger Library for the History of Women in America, and them coming together to make sure my archives, my art, the visual record of my art is secure and is there. Because, you know, for me, even though I didn't learn women's history when I was growing up, when I went looking for it, it was there.
It was there.
And so all I realize I can do is make sure
It's there.
that what I have done is there too.
And I think there are going to be generations of women and men who make sure that your legacy is there and available to many, many, many people. to
Well, the
come.
one thing I know in terms of my visual archive, when people ask me why I'm giving it to Nemours, it's because it's the only museum in the world dedicated to the preservation of women's art. And you know, the Whitney threw out Joe Hopper's art.
Yeah.
The Museum of Modern Art is the museum of men's art with a few women and artists of color thrown in.
This
My
was
legacy belongs
here.
here.
It does. It does.
So did we talk too long?
I know, we're gonna be good. Judy, all right, let me gather myself because that was an incredible, I just cannot thank you enough. I'm so honored to be working with you and up here with you. Let's give other people a chance to feel what I feel, which is to get to ask you a couple of questions.
Well, Allie, I
Yeah.
have to say that I think it was really interesting having this conversation with you.
Good.
Really, really interesting.
there's more to
Moving to me, too. Moving to me to see you enacting the efforts to change the museum you were heading.
Yes, and that's exactly what I went there to do, and we're going to talk more and more about that, and it's going to be your inspiration in many ways in this conversation that I continue to turn to in my mind when there are people in front of me saying, stop. So,
Stop.
Yep, exactly. Okay, we have time for a few questions.
So we
Okay,
have,
could you, let's see, Melanie, how that, you want
Yeah,
them
you
to
want to
come
tell
up,
us
right?
how to do this?
And
Okay,
ask
so
them,
we
to introduce themselves.
Absolutely, and then we have a few questions from email as well.
Okay.
So I have one question that I'm gonna start off from the email. She says, "I admire your fearlessness. For me, that quality has taken many years to develop. I would love to hear about your experience. Were you always fearless? How did that quality develop in you?"
Well, you talked a lot about that, yeah.
I am not fearless. That is
is.
just not true. Huh? What?
But you're scary.
I'm scary? I am?
You're a force. You're a force. All right, let's,
I am not fearless. I mean, one of the problems with that perception is it sets me apart from everybody else. I mean, you know, like I had a panic attack a couple of weeks ago. You know, I was facing 3 shows in 2 months, lots of public events, lots of interviews. I'm 78 years
oh
old.
my gosh.
I had a panic attack, you know. Donald had to help me. We had to get on the phone with his therapist, you know.
You're human.
Right, and I think that's really important, because if I'm fearless, then, you know, oh, well, then somebody else can say, well, I'm not fearless, I'm fearful.
I can't do that.
I can't do that. I mean, I just was reading something in the Times today about fear and about forcing oneself to overcome fear.
Yeah, oh, I gotta read that. Is it good?
Well, I mean, it was just familiar.
Yeah. Okay, we have a question here.
Hello, my name is Diane Tuckman. I'm a photographer and a silk artist. I paint on silk, which is an art form I
Silk
introduced
Could
to
you
America.
talk a little louder? I can't hear you. Can you
And I
hear
can
her?
repeat too if need be.
Should I repeat?
Yes, please. Milani, you've got to repeat her question. Women need to learn to speak up.
I
One
speak
of
up.
the
I teach-
greatest, huh? Okay. Oh, it's the mic, huh? Oh, sorry. Okay.
Now,
Get that
can you hear
woman a
me?
good mic.
Can you
Okay.
hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
My name is Diane Tuckman, and we have very similar backgrounds because I escaped. My family escaped. I immigrated twice, et cetera. And I was very interested in the arts as a young person. I couldn't do it because we were in limbo. And basically, the fear of art took a hold, and eventually, like you never had the fear of art. I got over it because I felt that there was a sisterhood of women around me who helped me do that. And I think that is critical, which you did also have people help you.
You have a question?
Yes, my question is, we are always told, how do we get recognized, appreciated, collected? And people say, oh, you just do blah, 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 blah. Well, I would like to, my hat's off to you and all the other women who have found a way to come to their artistic legacy. And I appreciate
Actually,
that.
Allie can address this question better than I can about the actual mechanisms of the art world.
Of the art world, and people ask me that all the time. How do you get recognized? And there are things about the art world that I think are really troubling, right? It's not just about talent or desire or passion. We know so many talented, passionate artists who never go beyond just making art for themselves. I mean, the reality of the system of the art world is that there are galleries, you need to be out there in the world, you need to be able to articulate and talk about what you're doing, you need to be able to withstand some criticism and continue to articulate and talk about what you're doing. But it is about reaching out to people who will help promote the work, to curators who will help write about and canonize the work. But it is a 1 in a million thing, unfortunately, for
The
artists.
distribution system for art
The
is
distribution
very
system.
small.
It's very small. And I think with the internet, I know a lot of people who are trying to come up with a way to make it almost more democratic so that there's more possibilities to get your work out there and seen, but you need to be able to speak about it and write about it in an important way, and you need to be out there in the world meeting people. But it is a problem that needs to be addressed because a lot of times it has as much to do with personality and someone being able to market
And also
themselves.
where you live.
Where you live is another big problem. And I do think, though, where you live, are you in an art world center? Are you out at the events that people know to see you at? The biennial system and the art fair system, which have problems, I do think are beginning to help artists who live in places where there aren't great art schools or aren't great museums, with the Dakar Biennial or the Sharjah Biennial or various things. There are artists from other parts of the world that I think are starting to come to fruition, but how artists here or artists who struggle, the system is complicated and it's flawed.
I mean, my husband is a fantastic photographer.
Right,
He doesn't have a gallery.
right. It's a gallery system. All right, but it's a good question. All right, next question. Hi.
Hi, I'm Nikki Luna. I'm actually here for an artist fellowship in New York, and I'm from the Philippines. And actually, I could relate to your work and everything that we've talked about tonight. And we obviously touched on the blatant misogyny that we are exposed to from Trump and from our very own president. So I was just wondering, as feminist artists, how else do you think you could make those in the developing countries who still struggle, I mean, from maternal health to education to forced labor, how else do you think as feminist artists can we include or be more inclusive of those who are left behind?
One of Allie's and my conversations since we've started talking is about the expectations on women to do all, be all, provide all. I have no idea.
Right.
I make art. That's all I know how to
yes.
do.
I think that's a really amazing answer, right? Art is not a political tool. You make art about things you feel are important, and the world starts to see them. But right, you.
And the first step is women saying, you know what? I can't do all that.
Yes. That's a really great point. All right, thank you.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Eby. I'm also from Chicago, and I'm also an artist.
Yay.
And my mom, by the way, was also an artist and started a scholarship fund at the Art Institute in Chicago, which I'm very proud of. Anyway, my question for you is, I understand that you got your name Judy Chicago because you were from Chicago and we're having an identity crisis. At least that's what it said in Wikipedia.
Wikipedia. That's what it says in Wikipedia. It says that you got your name because of an identity crisis. We're going to correct that tonight.
I think that men and women both have to battle with fear periodically, but I also think that we have to battle with identity periodically as we change. So my question is Judy Chicago still Chicago a good name for you?
It's your name, right?
It's my name.
It's her name.
Right.
What's your name
Actually, the thing in Wikipedia, the entry comes close to the stupidity of what one writer wrote, which was that I changed my name to Judy Chicago so my initials would be JC, considering the fact that I was born Judy Cohen.
Oh my goodness.
But I was born Judy Cohen. I started showing under that name when I was a young woman in LA, but my dealer at the time, Rolf Nelson, used to call me Judy Chicago because I had this incredible Chicago accent. And it was a time when a lot of LA artists had underground names. Wait. And then, you want to know or you want to believe Wikipedia? Huh?
It was given to you. Yes,
No,
it was.
Rolf gave it to me, but he wanted me to change it then, but I didn't want to. The reason I ended up changing my name was because I started using my first husband's name because it was less common than Cohen, and there were a lot of Cohen showing. And then he died after 2 years. And I was 23. I had this name of somebody I was married to for 2 years, and people would come up to me and say, I know your parents. But it wasn't my parents, they were his parents. So I felt like I didn't have a name.
Yeah.
So then when I wanted to make this symbolic gesture about how I was about to make a really radical step in my art making, and make a change and set off on this direction to create a feminist art practice, I'm like, because, you know, we were kind of influenced by the Black Panthers in the 60s and 70s, you know. And so I'm like, I'm going to become Judy Chicago.
I mean, it's a cool name. It's cool. I think,
Yeah, so?
Yeah. All right, that's a good.
That was Irving Berlin, remember him?
Irving Berlin and Judy
Those
Chicago.
people used to ask him all the time how he became Irving Berlin. Believe me, that was not the name he started out with.
All right, so I will take it upon myself to correct Wikipedia. Okay. All right,
Hi.
next question.
Okay, who are you? Speak up, will
My
you?
name is Patty. I'm the resident artist at the Arena Stage Mead Center for American Theater. I'm also a fine artist. I'm interested, artist to artist. What tools, personal tools, do you have for inspiration and that moments of creativity to get inspired that you use? Some people use yoga, meditation, etc. But what tools do you have for your process?
I get up in the morning and I go in my studio.
No matter what. All right.
Sorry, I wish it were more romantic.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chicago. I'm Amy Hutchins. My question is, I had a chance to walk through the exhibition before we started here, and it's excellent. I love the chance to kind of see behind the scenes. Can you talk a little bit more about the process of selecting the women for the dinner party? How did that process go? It sounded like it was really collective.
I have written 5 books on the dinner party. They extensively document the process by which we made the selections. So I'm going to suggest that you read one of them.
Go by the book.
Unless Diane wants to come
But
up and
also,
tell
like,
you.
the show, I feel like, starts to answer that a little bit, too. How are we doing? We have time for one more?
Hi, again.
My name is Jennifer, again. My name is Jennifer Queen. I'm from Los Angeles, California. I am not an artist, but I am in awe of your work, and I'm vaguely familiar with some of it. I wanted to know, my question specifically is about the 60s and your influence, how you were influenced by the Black Panther Party.
Well, you have to understand, my father was a Marxist and a labor organizer, and he organized in the African American community. And I was brought up with like political discourse in my house and record parties with people of all types. And I belonged to the NAACP when I was in college. And I have tried to be an advocate for all people whose voices have been left out. That's what I believe. For me, what feminist practice is insisting on every voice is important. And I was frightened by the violence related to the Black Panthers, supportive of their efforts, and critical of Stokely Carmichael's statement that the position of women was prone.
Yeah. I think it relates to what we've been talking about the lens of feminism.
How do you feel about it?
About
The Black Panther Party. Yeah, go get the mic.
Yeah. Okay.
So thank you for asking me back the question. My views on the Black Panther Party are about as complex as yours. I mean, they're layered. I've been deeply influenced by them, by the history, by the resistance, by just the fortitude and the audacity of them in that moment and how that has influenced us throughout time. But I'm also deeply critical of the misogyny, of the unbalanced maleness that happened in the party, even through the ranks, the way that some of the women were just denigrated to positions of being secretaries and their voices weren't heard as widely and as prolific as some of the men that we know.
So we're in complete agreement.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Glad to know that.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Would you say in terms of your art that there's a specific way that you can see their influence like on your art or in the way that you go about it aesthetically, or no?
Is there a specific place within your practice where you can see the influence of the Black Panthers? I would say.
Or of that
And like I
time. and
said,
uses
you know,
that.
my name change, everybody was changing their name in the
Yeah.
60s, you remember that?
The name change.
Name change.
All right, thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Okay.
I think it's our last question. Thank you.
And I hope it's relevant. My name's Emily, I'm from Boston, and I first saw your exhibit when it was there in the 70s, and I've been a fan ever since. Why are you choosing Penn State and the Schlesinger, I think the Schlesinger you said,
Yeah.
and this museum as a partnership? Could you just elaborate a little on that? My husband went to Penn State, I'm from Pittsburgh, it's like Penn State. So, thank you.
Actually, the Schlesinger Library for the History of Women in America, which used to be at Radcliffe, but is now at Harvard. Of course, Harvard's never going out of business either, so that's a good thing if you're looking for a place for longevity. Actually approached me. And I'm going to tell you a story about Mary Ross Taylor, who Susan mentioned, the Mary Ross Taylor Exhibition Fund. I've known Mary Ross for a very long time. When she was working with me on the Birth Project, because she sort of had the role in the Birth Project as the administrator that Diane had in the dinner party, she wrote to the Archives of American Art, because there were all these boxes of dinner party material, archives. She wrote to the Archives of American Art and asked them if they might be interested in them. And they said no, it would not be of interest to them. Now, I'm going to tell you that 20 years later, somebody woke up and they flew to New Mexico, but by then I had sat next to Mary Maples Dunn, who was the then director of the Schlesinger Library. And she asked me what was happening to my archives, and they were sitting in temperature-controlled, cheap storage facilities. There were young art historians starting to look at them, and they were not being cared for. And I went to the Schlesinger Library for the History of Women in America, and I saw on the walls the photographs of all the women I had been researching: Elizabeth Blackwell, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and there were 4 floors of people working on women's history, and I burst into tears. Yeah. I had the experience people tell me they have when they go see the dinner party. They're suddenly confronted with the presence of our history, and they realize that they have grown up with nothing but absence. And when Mary Maples Dunn asked me to give them my archives, I'm like, my archives belong here. Belong in that history, just like my art belongs here in the history that Nemours preserves. And I'm very happy that my art education archive is at Penn State, because they have incredible resources and a vision for the future of the libraries there that I have great admiration for. And the idea that 3 East Coast institutions are working together, is that a feminist achievement or not?
Okay. Judy, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much to everybody at Nemours. Thank you to you. And oh my goodness, Judy Chicago, thank you so much.
So